Right beside old Unit 3 sits a shell-marked waste you see. Tanks of resin stacked with care, holding what the pumps caught there. TEPCO field 2 plans to show. One says yes, the other no. Each awaits a coming call. Neither clears the path at all. So they say, when the work might get underway. Decommission down the line, mid-century's hopeful sign. 880 tons remain, none retrieved from 3's domain. They debate what space to claim, still the Buildington stays the same. From Unit 2, a careful shot, not from 3, not from 4. Still they work around the door, less than a gram. Still asking for
Hello everybody, welcome back. Hope you're doing well on this Thursday. Thursday's my Friday, your Fridays. We start our shows on Sunday. Put a link to that song. The opening song is in the description. And you can find so many other amazing songs. I got to make a playlist of some of my, I can't say my favorite songs, but some of my favorite songs. And James has a lot of different genres. He just recently put out, we were trying to figure it out there a little while ago what the genre was. I was thinking like it was like a disco type era for his latest song that he put out. And let me put that up there for you for a second. So this overdiagnosis, and he always has a link below the videos to the story that he's responding to, basically. He wrote the song about typically, I shouldn't say anything, I guess, but about an outrage and betrayal by the industry of the most vulnerable of society. And Hateful Nuclear Wonderland, if you haven't, I've watched that several times, trying to take in the incredible graphics. Just, holy smokes, man. It's really special that what he's got done there. You gotta have an incredible vision to do stuff like that. So we're going to go back into the die-off section. We've done a 6, 7, 8 videos over the last couple of weeks on die-offs. They're always emaciated. And so the poll tonight is asking a question. I'm going to show it to you in a moment here, hopefully. Oh, it was disco. And I covered that article this morning. It was Martin Frackler. And right, we played his video of Martin Frackler pretty regularly around here. And it infuriated me when I read the story this morning. James done the song based on that same article that I was looking at this morning. And I decided to do a die-off video instead tonight, so On Sunday show, we'll probably cover the song and the story, most likely. Grey whale die-off fear. The starving whales, this was April of this year, migrating as starving whales. You're talking about 13,000 migratory whales. It was a disco, and so at least I got that much right. The salmon and the bees are definitely at an extinction level right now, yeah. Sacramento, thank you, yeah. You're right. It's gotten so much worse now in the last couple of years post-Fukushima. So this story came out. There's a bunch of stories similar to this. Thousands of gray whales, 13,000, are migrating north from Baja, California. And they're in poor condition, they say, because of feeding conditions. They're in poor condition because the perpetual radioactive fall of the pulse event from Japan on top of that has broken the food chain. And that's why we've done 7 or 8 presentations on the die-offs. All the animals are emaciated. And everything we're seeing is post-Fukushima events. The whales were already in poor shape last fall when they began the 12,000-mile migration to breeding and the calving grounds off the coast of Mexico to Baja. And they had no surviving babies made the migratory trip last year. And that's not an extinction event. What actually is, I wonder? All the whales we are seeing are extremely emaciated. Extremely emaciated. Bulging ribs with shoulder blades and the vertebrae visible even from the shore. It's really just horrific. Oh, that's worse than horrific. You can see their peanut heads. You can see their rib cages, their shoulder blades. That's the end of it. And that's the poll tonight. Considering all the remaining grey whales, the 13,000 grey whales, a lot have died since they started the migration this year. They were all emaciated last year. They lost all their blubber. Does anybody really think they're going to make it in 2 years' time? That there'll be any left in 2 years' time? Because they all eat the same food. They all travel together. You can't have like half emaciated and the other half's not emaciated. Considering all the remaining grey whales are emaciated / starving to death and dying, will they go extinct within 2 years? I'm afraid that's... it's not just going to be the grey whales on top of that. I'm afraid that's what we're looking at. I'm Dana, by the way, and you can call into these shows at 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. I'm a little bit frazzled. I'm trying to get set up so I can do some field studies. It's because we have the biggest migratory seabirds, saltwater birds on the entire planet, 46 million migratory birds. And I need to try to cover as many bases as I can. And this, each year is a little bit harder. We have a little less support all the time, and we're just keeping it together. We're just barely keeping things together. But it's been like that for a few years. And so that's now normal. There's nothing normal about it, but it makes it hard to do the research, right? It's not an accident that is happening to me. Would be like Chernobyl on steroids if the spent fuel catches fire. I just kind of want to lay down a bit of a foundation for a few minutes. It's not going to be a long, drawn-out one. So each building holds 3,450 spent fuel assemblies. That's over 6 million pounds. Oh, excuse me. So there was 4 buildings lost all of their inventories, and it could be a lot more than 6 million pounds. Just bear with me. because these are complicated stories and we're not afforded the luxury of making mistakes, which is absolutely acceptable. 3, 4, 5, times, and we'll just bring up the mat for you for a minute. So 3,450 assemblies. Each assembly has 100 fuel rods. Each fuel rod weighs 18 pounds to 12 feet long. So the assemblies are typically 1,800 pounds. Uranium, plutonium is 6.2 million. Could divide that by 2,200 pounds to get tons. That's 2,800 tons per building, but the official story is there's only 800 tons in all the buildings combined, right? And so if you multiply that by 4, you should be able to figure it out pretty quick. It's over 11,000 tons. Officially, they say there's only around 800, 900 tons. So then where did all the... Now, they claim they got all the fuel out of the pools of reactor 3 and 4. The industry is an exceptional lawyer. We're just going to jump into the die-offs here in a minute. So 4 buildings lost their entire inventories, and they done something unusual for reactor 3 and 4, where they actually pretended that they were in the building and that everything was okay, which lends more credence to we have an extinction event because of massive releases from Japan. It's hard to predict how this is playing out. The way we've been predicting it so far is fairly accurate. We know we know there's going to be something significant is going to have to distract the population, I would imagine, because over the next 2 years, most of the whales are going to start disappearing, particularly the gray whales, because they're so big and because of their particular food source. That on its own will tell a story because they like the basis of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestration chain, the microscopic animals. And there's a lot of species out there that have showed up emaciated because they can't find it either, not just the gray whales. And because the gray whales cover such a vast distance, around 12,000 miles, in their migratory runs. All it takes is cooling to stop circulating at the spent fuel pool. It doesn't matter which one it is, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 1, number 2, for extensive fuel damage to occur. It doesn't have to leak, crack, or fall for fuel to overheat. It just needs to stop the circulation of water. So when you see the black smoke that came from the common spent fuel pool chimney, and so we know some of the windows were breached by the tsunami at the common spent fuel pool, which was behind reactor 4 and reactor 3. It's across the road on the same street. And it's nowhere near as tall as the 190-foot, 65-meter, 19-story reactors. And it's where they had decades of reactor cores also stored. All the fuel pools are stuffed for over 4 decades with reactor cores because Japan or nobody else on the planet has a repository to hold it. So that inventory was lost. That's why they're pretending they're on top of a building that don't exist. Fukushima chief was pleading for help from the United States military. Fire broke out of reactor 4. We can't do anything. Now, reactor 4 is this building here. Now, officially, that never happened. These are the official pictures, and that's the official picture over there. One of them can't, 4 of them can't be real. Only one of them can be real. So you can't be on top of a nuclear meltdown, no matter how stoic or brave or stupid you are. Your organs melt. You die right away. And so there, apparently in the United States, has had 70 identical reactors. Ernie Gunnarsson actually made the racks for the fuel assemblies in the fuel pool, so he knows they're gone, but he refuses to acknowledge it. And so a lot of people are being directed to Ernie because he's apparently he's part of the industry, pretending he's anti-nuclear when he's clearly pro-nuclear. And his wife was a pro-nuclear spokesperson for 20 years, for 2 decades. So when you see the spinal column sticking out, you can see the peanut head very defined. You can see the bones on the tail. That's not normal. It should be 12 inches of blubber. None of that should be visible. U.S. Department of Energy lab in the Pacific Northwest has declined to make the nuclear fallout results public after initially releasing the data. Radiation forecast withheld by the government. Releasing it would cause unnecessary panic. The ministry in Japan decided the data would be unavailable because they would lose power. Official Japanese government withheld the radiation forecast. Now, they made 5,500 models based on the SPEEDY system, where you put numbers into what's known as the SPEEDY system. It makes a model of radioactive fallout. And they gave it to the American military, but they didn't give it to the population that paid for it. Radiation forecast in Japan kept secret to avoid panic in the whole of society. Government hid the radiation simulation because it was very, very bad and showed a serious contamination. This was Kyoto, major medias. Now they all pretend like it never even happened. They didn't tell these stories. Japan government gave the SPEEDY radiation forecast to the United States military, but not their own country. United States got the SPEEDY forecast 10 days before the Japan public. And government claimed the projections weren't accurate. Radiation forecast withheld by the government. Releasing would cause unnecessary panic. We covered it. Mother tells officials, lick the soil, lick the soil. Children lick that soil. Take the soil in your hands and lick it after being told it doesn't need to be removed from Fukushima school, which should have, 300,000 people in that community, everybody's house was entitled to be decontaminated, but you can't decontaminate a house or a shop or a school or a university or a hospital or anything else. And officials made it mandatory to use Fukushima rice in the school lunches, which is insane because there was 865,000 cancers in the population in the first year, extra cancers compared to any other year before, in just the first year, and there was 13,646 out of 38,200 children with thyroid tumors of 2 centimeters. And the thyroid in a child is only around 2 by 3 centimeters. So you had a tumor the size of their thyroid gland, which is absurd. They covered it up successfully. In fact, that was James's recent song, 10, 12 hours ago, was particularly about that stuff. High concentrations of radiation hit the United States and Canada, rich in cesium. For every cesium, there's 100 strontium-90s. Okay. You're getting the picture of where I'm coming to. The buildings are gone. They banned the food in 14 prefectures, but nothing got out by 55 countries around the world. The plutonium, which is only based on 20 days, the neptunium-239 decays to plutonium after 2.5 days. 50% of it will decay to plutonium, with a 24,000 year before it decays to a different isotope. And plutonium was named after the devil, of course. This French model, you can see the plume. Think of a snowstorm, and this model will stop at around 20 days, 23 days or something, this particular model you're looking at here, because I chopped it up. So at the end of 23 days, the plume covers the whole planet as 1 million to 10 million atoms, and each atom pulses energy 600 feet every second. So every species, no matter where you're on the planet or what species you're getting a full body X-ray. And these inventories weren't included in those models and those studies. And that model is based on a spike. It's not based on a projection. It's not based on a conjecture and an opinion. It's actually based on a spike of 1 million to 10 million times what it was pre-Fukushima. And in 23 days, it covers the whole planet. So we've had an event, and pretending we never had an event, and trying to blame it on your tin cans, your pop bottles, and your garbage cans is not very constructive. Investigation chairman, one Fukushima may destroy the whole country. Collapse of a whole country is possible. Now, when you see this kind of radioactive fallout, like I'm about to show you, this is the xenon-133 based on 20 days. The iodine-131, of course, you got to have a pulse of energy every second to qualify as an iodine-131. So 20 million atoms is 20 million particles, even worse, is 20 million pulses of energy every second in a single liter of water. You can't just have that. Now, it's Chris Sarkozy.
And living next to a nuclear power station can actually contribute less than your loved one when it comes to...
So, how did the audience know that that was funny? Because it's actually not. And how did they all know to laugh? Because that was uniform to a small audience, what you just heard. And you can go watch that presentation, The Fukushima Nuclear Crisis, Separating Fact from Fiction, which we've done 2 presentations on that on my other site before they took it down on me. At the end of that, he discloses...
with myself as one of the principal investigators, was awarded $6 million.
$6 million. So he had a pretty big incentive to lie. And another Canadian study out of Ottawa, Canada, was 220 million atoms. And so I don't care who you are. I don't care how smart you think you are. I don't care how fit you think you are. I don't care how much money you have. I don't care where you live. You got poisoned forever. And so did your loved ones and your friends and your families and every species on this planet. You're not immune to radioactive fallout. You're not different than anybody else. It doesn't matter how educated you are, how poor you are, how wealthy you are, how impoverished you are. It doesn't. None of it matters. Everything and every species are poisoned for millions and millions of years. And the nuclear industry has taken over your universities, your media. They're very successful at covering this stuff up. They've been at it for 80 years. And so they have an enormous amount of resources at their fingertips. You have a virtually unlimited budget to fund the public relation firms. We know there's, by their own mouths, that there's at least 1,000 public relation firms dedicated to the nuclear industry. Their job is to silence any dissenting voices. All the Plume studies shows the whole planet covered in less than 30 days, no matter where you go. So they're trying to blame the species die-off on avian influenza, but it's clear because all the species are showing up severe emaciation. Anecdotal evidence suggests. Well, anecdotal evidence don't suggest anything because it's anecdotal evidence is not actual evidence. It's anecdotal. It's the opposite of evidence, right? It's not evidence. And so we, last month, have done field studies on puffins and gannets. And their die-offs are confirmed from starvation, not from the pseudoscience avian influenza narrative. And so we already showed around 1,300 pictures of the puffins. We've seen no pufflings, baby puffins, fledglings whatsoever, not one. Well, that's a lie. We've seen one, and we've only seen a few birds coming back with food. And we covered that in 6-7 videos amongst all the other documentation for the assertions that we're bringing to the table here. We've seen one baby was carried out of the nest and thrown away because it was dead. Part of 23 pilot whales found dead after a mass stranding. So the pilot whales is a really interesting story because there is a history of them mass strandings since the nuclear industry existed, that is, only. There was one incident before that. But all the species are doing the exact same thing. It's not just pilot whales. And in 2014, 2015, 2016, when they done necropsies, animal autopsies on the pilot whales, they always reported they had empty stomachs. I mean, we covered that last couple of weeks. I'll give you an example here to think about. So you can see all species of whales are emaciated. All species of whales, why are all species emaciated post-Fukushima? Whales, birds, insects going extinct. Death of whales, birds, insects, post-Fukushima. Whales, insects, birds, post-Fukushima, radioactive fallout. Radioactive shrimp, whales, birds, insects, mass die-off. Fukushima meltdown caused species extinction events worldwide, dead and emaciated whales. You kind of get the picture. I've been at this for a long time. And you can go into my, those videos are not in the playlist, but you can go into my playlist, mass species die-offs, and click on view full playlist. I haven't added all those videos I just showed you yet. And we have a lot of die-off documentations over the last number of years. And you can see the Zodiac, that's the actual research expeditions, where we streamed some of that live from the ocean. I tell you, what we seen was just startling. But what we can't show you is that every die-off we do, almost everything we're looking at is emaciated. So you can, and the avian influenza wasn't invoked until late 20s. Before that, there was starvation. And so the International Atomic Energy Agency in 2013 had made the assertion that nothing died of starvation. It's all dying of avian influenza, and that nothing melted down, that everything is reactor 3, reactor 4 completely intact, and they got the fuel out of it. And these are... that's desperation, what you're talking about right there. You know, like when it's pretty powerful. You got all the major medias worldwide, pretending they're on top of a building that don't exist, reactor 4. And you don't see anything for reactor 3, but not so many of them. But some of the same ones, like Rupert Winfield Hayes with the BBC done that. So why would you do that? Why would you... Because for CBS and BBC and CNN, ABC and the rest of them, they had to get, all the management had to go along with the fake story, right? All the videographers, the camera crews, the makeup art, everybody had to go along with a fake story because they all knew, those people that helped them do these videos knew they weren't at Fukushima. And so the editors, the producers at CBS and BBC and CNN and ABC Australia, et cetera, were in on that lie. So that's quite frightening. It's. I don't think it's acceptable. I don't see how it can be acceptable. It's not illegal to poison you with radiation. Congress and Parliament doesn't have the authority to do it. So therefore, it's not illegal to put out that propaganda. It's despicable. It's unconscionable, but it's not illegal. It was a rough week for me so far. We got through it, though. We've done pretty good. I thought we had a good week this week. We got 5 shows, and I didn't think that was going to happen. A full investigation to the stranding won't take place. It won't, though. This is something. This was in Scotland, that particular one. Most of these stories in the last 2 months or something are covered from here on out, I do believe. The mammals were discovered on an island of Sanday on Sunday, but it appeared they had dead for several days. About a dozen were still alive. So they said they appeared dead for several days, and then the next sentence he says they were still alive. Dead humpback whales up. Now all the humpback whales are emaciated. The killer whales are all emaciated. The covert beak whales are all emaciated. The sperm whales are all emaciated. The fin whales, the blue whales. Ultimately, this is what we're seeing. Dead humpback whale washes up in Cow Bay shoreline in Halifax, Canada. And he said the humpback population is pretty healthy. The humpback population, 7,000 humpback whales starved to death during the Fukushima plume. They call it the blob. It's a heat wave because you kill the bases of the food chain, the oxygen chain, the carbon sequestering chain. So the ocean is heating up because of that. You broke the see, a glass of salt water, seawater, would have 1 billion creatures in it. Now you take a glass of water up and you don't see any creatures in it. You got any idea how much trouble we're actually in? So to suggest that the humpback whale is healthy, when the reality of it is quite clear they're not healthy. What would happen if blue whales went extinct? This was last month, as they go silent and trigger terrifying warnings for humanity. Well, who's more likely? The humpback whale and the gray whales are all emaciated, every one of them. Right, so look over here to the blue whales instead of looking at what's really going on. And this suggests that the hump whales are healthy, when in reality this was on top of an unusual mortality event. Artificial intelligence, because you have pictures of all the whales and the fins and that, and artificial intelligence said there's 7,000 whales weren't photographed in the last year or two. So therefore they're dead because they're predictable. They have a migratory route they've been doing for millions of generations. And then they stopped doing it. So they didn't just stop doing it, they died. That's the consensus. What would happen to all blue whales when extinct? As they go silent and trigger a terrifying warning for humanity. So what it was, they didn't want to say the word gray whale, because if you look up gray whales, the remaining gray whales are severely emaciated on their migratory run. After being severely emaciated on their southerly run last year, they're headed north. They most likely are not going to make it because even when they're healthy, it's a long haul, right? But being severely emaciated before you even get to Baja, Mexico, and now you're headed north, and you're still emaciated, still no food. And we do believe, right, because they consume so much phytoplankton, zooplankton, and microscopic invertebrates with the backbones and stuff like this, which bioaccumulate the radiation. Then by proxy, then the bioaccumulation for the whales is going to be many thousands per kilogram. And so they have cancer and leukemia, and they're not able to uptake nutrition. Just like a cancer victim in the hospitals. So a 200-ton whale, 200 tons, starving, a 400,000-pound whale starving to death, is just not, is something we've never seen pre-Fukushima. All of these are post-Fukushima events. So the most likely culprit has to be Fukushima, unfortunately. A whale is killed in New Jersey waters after a boat crashes into it, throwing sailors overboard. And remember that story, that showed up everywhere. But that's not what happened. The whale was emaciated. It was trying to beach in very shallow water. The boat got in front of it, and because the whale couldn't breathe, it was trying to beach itself, which means it can't breathe. And so beaching itself is the only way it can keep its blowhole out of the water, or it's going to drown. And so the media came out and told a story complete opposite of what was really happening. And there was a person knocked overboard, and then they stood up and hung onto the boat. Like they didn't have, they just stood up and put their hand on the boat, but they were stood up. It was very shallow water. Scientists find blue whales suddenly going silent, and why they think it's happening. Well, that's the conjectures, right? They refuse to acknowledge Japan happened. And so if you're not going to include all the environmental concerns, then you're a very dishonest, subhuman type person, right? / journalist. Changing ocean conditions are making whales' prey scarce. No, you broke the food chain. They're not. It's not that it's. Yeah, technically, they're right. Whale prey scarce. Like this is desperation to avoid uttering the appropriate words that the food chain is broken. And by proxy, they're causing mammals to stop singing. Well, when you're emaciated for 2 years straight, and you don't have enough strength to sing on top of that, and there's nothing to sing for, the food chain is broken. And a 400,000-pound whale can last a long time, but not forever. They're causing the mammals to stop singing. Spent 6 years monitoring the acoustic sounds of blue, fin, and humpback whales off the California coast, post-Fukushima 2015 to 2021. And so you can't get a consensus without including Fukushima into that equation. You're completely dishonest to exclude that. Researchers set out to determine whether the frequency of whale songs changed seasonally and whether that frequency was indicative of changes within marine ecosystems. But they refuse to acknowledge that the food chain is broken, that all species are suffering the same fate, and that the most likely culprit is the fact we broke the food chain in 2011. So what happened in 2011 that broke the food chain? It had to be a pretty catastrophic event to affect the food chain worldwide. And so there's only one thing out there that makes that criteria, unfortunately. And that is the event in Japan. I was out working on the gear all morning till around almost 1 o'clock, and I was out again tonight working on it, just like till about an hour and a half, 2 hours before the show went live. Not even that, hour and a half or so. So I apologize. I'm doing the best I can, right? I'm trying to keep this whole operation moving forward, and I'm desperate to get some research in, but I'm being. The industry has got no one to pick on, really. And there's 1,000 public relation firms, so everybody's taking a joint dump on me. I'm actually I like to believe I'm a pretty good person. Researchers set out to determine whether the frequency of whale songs changed seasonally and whether the frequency was indicative of changes within the meek. So, like, they started the study in 2015, 4 years after Fukushima. And if you're not going to include Fukushima into that equation, then your research is pointless. It's literally dishonest. Scientists found the level of whale songs among different species correlated with their ability to locate and consume prey. When they're all emaciated, then they can, if you're emaciated, you're not singing pop songs, you're not humming to commercials on TV, you're not in a very good mood, right? Marine biologists began to research in 2015 when the marine heat wave dubbed the blob caused a large percentage of krill, teeny shrimp-like creatures to disappear, and humpback blue and fin whales largely depend on the krill as a primary food source. So there's many, many other pieces. So they're acknowledging that it disappeared. But the most likely culprit, because they're at the surface with the phytoplankton, is the radioactive fallout. And all the studies shows the radioactive fallout covers the whole planet. And the problem with the radioactive fallout is not just for humans, right? It's 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison. And when it bioaccumulates, it's infinitely worse than that. So 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison to environmentally sensitive species is a catastrophic event, see? And when you compare this stuff with X-rays and CAT scans, is meaningless, and that inhaling the particles increases the radiation exposure by a factor of 1 trillion. And what happens is your body attacks every single atom in your body, anthropogenic man-made atom, whether it's a whale or a bird or a blue whale, it doesn't matter what species it is. And so you have less red blood cells. Red blood cells carry oxygen nutrition for all the species in humans, right? And so this is what's going on. That's the reality, and it's such a sad story to disappear. So that's a very unusual that they acknowledge that the species, the food source it didn't go somewhere else, it disappeared, it died, we broke the food chain. Disappeared is confirmation of breaking the food chain. Humpback, blue, and fin whales largely depend upon the krill. So does the gray whales. The heat wave, which it wasn't a heat wave, it was a blob, all right, but it was like the story's twofold. So this was a study from a German institution. Just bear with me. And this was based on 2013, 2.5 years, 920 days right here. So that's the blob, that's radioactive. But that's the stuff that went directly into the ocean. The problem was, that takes 2.5 years, 900 days. But what happened was, by the time this study gets to day 16, the whole planet is covered in radioactive fallout. This is the French government. So all the water worldwide now is tritiated and sterile. So when you go down to the ocean right now, instead of being this incredible diversity of species per glass of water, of billion creatures, there's nothing in the glass. The ocean is clear. The ocean should be really, it should look like it's dirty. But what it is, it's a soup of life this time of the year, right? Because you have all the species are laying their eggs or they're milking, like the sea urchins and the starfish and the sea cucumbers, etc., will produce a sperm, and then all the different species will all mix together and they'll all find each other, and it's truly a soup of life. There's no other way to describe a glass of water from the ocean outside of a soup of life. If you took 10 gallons of ocean water and put it in the right environment, you can create another Earth, so to speak, because it's a soup of life. Well, it takes more than a couple of gallons or 5 gallons, but if you had a couple of 1,000 gallons, 5 gallons from all the different oceans, you would have, ultimately, in the right conditions, you could produce millions of species. This led to a scarcity of food supplies for fish, seals, penguins, and whales. It wasn't a scarcity, it was an extinction of the food chain, the busting of the food. The food chain got broken. It was a die-off. They were inundated with massive radioactive fallout, not just from the ocean's emissions, but the airborne too. So within 20 or 30 days, the whole planet, all the fresh water, all the seawater. And we done a really good show last night to explain that facet. This led to the breaking of the food chain, which led to the mass species die-off. Additionally, increasing temperatures contributed to the spreading of the toxic algae bloom in 2015-2016 in northeastern Pacific, leading to the most widespread poisoning marine mammals ever documented. So what was really going on was, this is true that this did happen in one context. Because when you break the food chain, you get rid of all the species, then that's a perfect for algae. And some algae produce like domoic acid, are very toxic, right? But in 2015, 2016, and 2017 and 18, we've seen millions of seabirds die. There was over 1 million common murres up in Alaska and northern Canada. And I was on research expeditions during those years for 4 to 5 months a year each time on the ocean without coming home. And so you had 1 million common murres. They dive 600 feet all day. They feed on anchovies and squid and sardines and krill and capelin and stuff like that, sandlands. And you had 1.4 million of the Cassini auklets. And they feed on microscopic animals, the zooplankton, the phytoplankton, and stuff like that. Microscopic animals. So you had two different spectrums of the food chain showing up in multi-millions emaciated over the whole coastline. And the problem was the tidal zones were wiped out in the tropical rainforests of British Columbia and Alaska all the way down to California. The tidal zones were wiped out. This was the nursery of the Pacific, so to speak, right? And the continental shelf. But it's only a 50-mile continental shelf, whereas the Atlantic is a couple of 100 miles. But we see now the same thing in the Atlantic. Additionally, increasing temperatures contribute to the spreading of the toxic algae bloom. Like they were trying to, we followed through all those studies where they tried to blame some of the die-offs on domoic acid, which is created by the toxic blooms, right? But ultimately, within a year or two, when those studies were finally released, it wasn't domoic acid, it was starvation events. Right? But telling a lie is the only thing that they're... And the problem is they keep tripping up in their own lies. In 2015, NOAA confirmed that he then recorded 53 incidents of involving whales getting caught in fishing gear. But remember this, 7,000 whales starved to death. They didn't get caught in fishing gears. And before Fukushima, there was a total of 1,200 whale and ship interactions. Not all the whales would have died. So if it was true that thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of whales were dying, and so you have 10,000 you have now 14,000 dead gray whales confirmed. You have around 10,000 humpback whales confirmed. You have 10,000 covert beak whales confirmed. And like if you find 1,000, then the consensus is there was 10,000 that died. You're only going to find 10%. We have endless stories of the sperm whales showing up severe emaciation. All the mass species die have this one thing in common, is severe emaciations. So they're trying to blame it on fishing gear, but there's less fishing gear, there's less fishermen, there's less activity. And it's because they're connected to the Department of Energy, which promotes nuclear. There's no big surprise they're going to tell these lies. But these are blatant lies that they've done. 7,000 humpback whales may have starved to death during the blob, and the blob was the radioactive emissions from Japan. Covers the whole planet. But all the studies show the same thing. As humpback whales can switch between feeding on krill and fish like sardines and anchovies, they experience the most positive song detection trend throughout the 6-year study. With the declining prey population, they were forced to spend more time hunting, leaving little time for singing. Well, it doesn't work that way. That's their genetic makeup. That's how they talk to each other. They jump out of the water to spot each other and to make sounds so they can hear each other. And they also, they can talk to each other over hundreds of miles. But there's nothing, after a number of years of finding no food whatsoever, then the most obvious issue is there's nothing to talk about. There's nothing, you can't say, come on over here. There's food over here, for instance. See? There's nothing to sing, so-called sing about, which is talking in their world, right? They're communicating. Patterns may continue as ocean temperatures rise. No, it's not the ocean. It's you broke the cycle of life on this planet. Marine heat waves also occurred in 2018, 2019, post-Fukushima, when whales fatten up on krill and prepare for the rest of the year. But they weren't. They were all showing up emaciated, and we covered this post-Fukushima, since Fukushima, right? And Noah's got a long legacy of being just dishonest and not very nice people. In a report issued in June, the agency revealed a steep decline in the Pacific gray whale. A new count suggests about 13,000 gray whales, the lowest number since the 1970s, which was peak nuclear testing, by the way. The Soviet test, China's, United States, everybody else's. Huge test too, by the way. The French test, 66 and the 70 test series. So like the Soviet Union's biggest bomb was equal to just about 4,000 Nagasaki bombs going off at one time. The biggest American test was equal to 11, 12, 1,400 Nagasaki bombs, Castle Bravo, going off at the same time. This radioactive fallout has been shown in many different studies to have a significant effect upon the migratory species. They didn't show up, or they were showing up in severe conditions. And so when you talk about the precedents going back to the middle of the nuclear era, where, it happened back in the 70s, some of this stuff. Well, yeah, because the nuclear testing. We didn't have these attributes recorded pre-nuclear industry. Changes in the ecosystem cause widespread malnutrition, reduced birth rates, and increased mortality. Mortality is starvation events, emaciation. Changes in the ecosystem, this is the breaking of the food chain from the massive radioactive emissions and fallout. The widespread malnutrition is starvation, it's emaciation. And unfortunately, and terribly and horrifically, that's what we've been covering for a very long time. Earlier this month, a boat in New Jersey struck a 26-foot long minke whale that had ventured into shallow water. preliminary necropsies finding indicate the mammal was thin, with empty gastrointestinal. Now, what happens is it takes many, many, many months for the whale to be thin. So it can do it without food for a couple of months easy. So not having food in its stomach it didn't die because it didn't eat for a week or two. It died because it didn't eat for a year or more. Right? And empty stomachs. And when you say little digestive material present, then why wouldn't they tell us what was actually there? So again, when they use the word thin, they're talking about severe emaciation because a whale has 12 inches of blubber. Whale dies after collision with a boat. This whale, as we know, because we've covered this. And there was another one that showed up in the same spot. They're supposed to be 20,000 pounds. Does that look 20,000 pounds to anybody? That's a brutal, emaciated whale. That's a mink whale too, right? At this point, we don't have much to go on. Stranding coordinator. Well, if you're not going to include the mass confirmation of starvation events, you're going to leave that out of the equation every single time, then that's a terrible thing to do. That's a completely dishonest thing to do. And that's not very helpful to do that. That's the side of the animal we were able to observe had no obvious marks on it. They love looking for some human interaction and try to blame it on you, see? And so when they say that, and they acknowledge that it was thin, and then they even invoked the last time a mink whale stranded in New Jersey was 2024 Cape May Point. And notice they don't show you any pictures, right? Only the boat picture. Mink whale that washed into the Jersey Shore beach this week had multiple medical issues when it was stranded alive. It had an emaciated body. It was trying to go up on the beach, and the boat cut it off, right? It was trying to go up on the beach. The boat got in the way, and you see the lady stood up there towards the bow with the white hat on, the blue jacket on. She stood up. She's not swimming or something. She's actually stood up in that shallow water. They cut the whale off, and the whale was trying to get up and beach itself because it's dying and it can't maintain its blowhole out of the water. And so it panicked and tried to swim under the boat. The media portrayed it as a collision. It's the furthest thing from a collision. It's literally, and that's Associated Press, so there was around 1,900 medias regurgitated the same story. There was 8 fuel pools in Fukushima, call it, that we know about. Now, the common span fuel pool could have went, and reactor 6 could have went, because there was 736 mystery pictures released. We covered that on the anniversary of this year. If you look up on my site, 736 mystery pictures, they were released in the 10th year, 2021. And nobody knows why. But when I went through the pictures, they were from a drone and started zooming in. Reactor 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 6 are redacted. And the common span fuel pool is completely redacted, which is on the same street as reactor 4. And so when you look at a similar mink whale in the same place, that's severe emaciation. That's severe. So there would be beak whales, we see them showing up all the time, severely emaciated too. It washed up alive, but so that's a healthy one. That's a healthy one. So you can see the difference, right? That's very healthy. That's not a healthy one. Right, so That's not a healthy whale. Because when you look at the shape of their body, look how different their body looks, right? So their beak, kind of looks small compared to the beak of this whale because they don't have that body mass anymore, right? But when you look at the tail, you can tell that it's severely emaciated. It's a dead giveaway every time. Solar energy is good for the planet, but it could be bad for the birds. You know what's bad for the birds is perpetual emissions breaking the food chain. We have millions of seabirds showing up emaciated from nuclear power, not from solar panels. Everything's going to have, like birds love it. We can't even find birds down here anymore. We have the biggest migratory route on the planet for seabirds. The cliffs are no longer stained with millions of generations of excrements. So they've been missing for 4, 5, 6 years. Medical doctor says they're not aware of any avian influenza cases in their jurisdiction. Bonneville said the news of an avian influenza flu causing the death of the Canadian geese on Jessie Lake Trail can't be true because they're not aware of avian influenza. All the die-offs starting in 2022, like if a fox died and it was killed on the highway, they sent it to the same laboratories. All of these went to this one government laboratory, and the government laboratory always said avian influenza. But when you send it to independent laboratories, they don't find avian influenza. What does that mean, I wonder? Can anybody read between the lines for me? UK households told to put bowls of water in the garden day and night from today. And so I've been doing that all summer. I have two containers of fresh water out there. I'll change the water, and I'll wash the bowls every 3 or 4 days, sometimes every day. While many will be able to enjoy the sunshine, it can be harmful to wildlife, birds, hedgehogs, other animals in the United Kingdom. But we're seeing, we're not seeing the typical dust in the forest and dirt roads. We're seeing powder. It's like flour, but it's even worse. It's totally different than what dust should be, right? And then the ground is so tinder dry that the forest fires here burnt 6 feet deep into the ground. They couldn't even put it out. Now because we have massive rainfall over a few different days, it put a pretty good dent into it. But because it's 6 feet underground, because the ground's not sucking up moisture anymore, like Chernobyl, the massive radioactive fallout worldwide has destroyed the biota. So the biota is dependent upon fungus and bacteria. And the fungus and bacteria is very vulnerable and it aggregates radiation. That kills the biota in proximity, which needs the bacteria and the fungus, and so does the roots of all the plants. And so now you don't have a functional root system because the bacteria fungus is gone, the biota is gone, millions of microscopic animals, and they were responsible for breaking down the foliage and the litter in your forests and meadows. And so that is not happening anymore. And this is why you're seeing bizarre forest fires. And because the ground is so dry, it's not soaking up water. So when you have rainfall, your typical rainfall, it doesn't soak up in the ground, so you have flash floods. And this was predicted. We predicted this 10, 12 years ago, that ultimately this is where you're going to end up. And sure enough, unfortunately and terrifyingly, we are seeing a brutal acceleration worldwide of that particular phenomenon that has never existed. Like we lived in harmony. The earth would soak up the water. And every morning there'd be huge morning dew, which would nourish the plants and the trees and the flowers and the bees and the fruit and everything else. That's gone. And so now the species are in this tinder dry environment. They don't have any access to any, like fresh water. The water that is there is sterile. And what we're seeing here on the east coast of Canada now is no fish jumping in ponds. There's no birds in the ponds. There are fish in the ponds, though, but there's no insects to jump after, I guess is what's really going on. That seems to be... But it's so bizarre because we have thousands and thousands and thousands of ponds, not to see any fish jumping. Like last year, we done extensive research field studies over 1,000 ponds, and only one pond that had, I think it was 5 or 6 ducks into it, mallards. But they were all raised in that pond area, those connecting ponds. And they should have flown away by then, but they didn't for some reason. But the rest of the ponds were silent. No fish jumping, no frogs. There's no frogs again this year. 2 years ago, we've seen frogs everywhere. And what was interesting about it, there was no predators. There was no crows. There was nothing feeding on them. And so it was impossible day and night to go out and not run into frogs. Right in my own garden, for instance. Last year and this year, we're not seeing them at all. And so that's quite worrisome. Gardening experts are also urging the public to consider the effects of hot weather on wildlife. In a pressing plea, Britain are being asked to place bowls of water in the garden or outside the homes whenever the weather heats up. And during extended periods of sunshine, there have been reports of dead birds found in the streets. A lot of this is due to starvation. So wonder they didn't invoke the avian influenza in that particular story. And endangered hedgehogs in the United Kingdom may also struggle due to the scarcity of water. Well, normally they will get their nourishment from just chewing on plants and everything else too, right? Normally water will show up in the morning as morning dew, so they would get the water they need right then. And then at nighttime, they would have access to it again, right, because of the temperature inversions. Every household is being encouraged to provide a source of drinking water outside their homes, either in the garden or on the driveway. This is a good practice for everybody. It's an easy practice. And put it somewhere where you can't miss it, so that way you know to change it. Either in the garden or in the driveways where the warm weather strikes the United Kingdom, Canada, United States, or anywhere else. And to keep the bird baths filled and clean. This should be left out around the clock and regularly refilled and cleaned. And because the water serves not only birds, but hedgehogs, toads, frogs, foxes, nocturnal wildlife, as well as early morning feeding birds. When the birds we're seeing are not insect eaters, they're seed eaters. And we're not seeing many of them, of course. The Wildlife Trust have explained water is essential for wildlife to thrive, but it isn't just for drinking. Amphibians like newts and frogs and toads use it as shelter and breeding grounds. Butterflies get valuable minerals and salt from slightly muddy water. And birds use water to bathe and remove parasites. And during hot summer weather, it's important to have plenty of water for animals and birds to drink and bathe in. Yeah, and that's what they're all going to disappear soon anyway. So doing our best we can for them is a pretty cool thing. But because they've been poisoned by radiation, the clock is ticking down. Water is the most valuable commodity for birds in the summer, and the forests have nothing in them. There's no spiders in your forest. Like our forest should have 500,000 spiders per acre. There's not one in there. Because normally you would check the spider webs to see what species are in that area of insects, right? The shallow trays is important so they don't get drowned or something. For birds, particularly during dry spells. You might need to refill them several times a day as evaporation can be rapid. And birds can suffer from heat stress or heat stroke. So providing shallow. In hot weather, birds lose moisture quickly and urgently need access to clean fresh water, not just for drinking but bathing. Tap water is absolutely safe to use. Place shallow. Recommend rinsing bird baths daily and giving them a full scrub at least once a week. So Britain is acknowledging the species are almost gone by that proxy. Southern California wildlife officials investigating unusual surge in sick and dying seagulls. Southern California. Initial tests for birds flu on 3 of the earliest cases were negative. Pretty despicable, eh? To try to keep that lie alive. Well, birds will, normally the birds would have no problem fighting off avian influenzas, right? Because they have a strong immune system. Because now their immune system is compromised through the radiation, they can't fight it off anymore. And it can jump species, but after millions of generations, it has never jumped species. But and we're not saying that it has jumped a species, but that's very suspect. We covered it as they put a big push in 2022. Right, but they kind of gave up that push But there was a huge push in 2022 to convince Canada, United States in particular, that avian influenza was a threat to all species. But you couldn't quantify that jumping species after millions of generations of not jumping species. What would be the catalyst for it to jump species? Because their immune systems were compromised in 2011 and on, right? Sick and brown pelicans overwhelming Orange County Animal Care Center. Sick and brown pelicans. 600 pelicans being cared for in Orange County, including more than 50 recently sickened brown pelicans. And they're trying to blame it on domoic acid toxicity, which could be true because the ocean is not producing oxygen, so the algae that produce domoic acid can be very prolific. But the birds will generally move somewhere else because they can fly, they're very mobile. You know, there's a long history of shellfish areas that have closed for certain conditions, right? And even when I was young, we seen that happening, but it was just little areas. It was never like the entire country or something, right? Officials say many of the birds are unable to eat on their own, and they attribute it to the domoic acid outbreak. But over the last few months, there have been an increased amount of incidents related to sick sea lions and other creatures, including 2 whales washed ashore within a week's time. Wildlife officials have not yet revealed if their deaths are related to the outbreak. Well, the consistent consensus on the dead whales are emaciation. Climate heat extremes are driving tropical bird decline. The reason we're seeing this is 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry, and we're talking vicious. We're talking 1,000 fuel pools that are splitting atoms. They're each full of decades of reactor cores, and each reactor core is splitting atoms that typically would for millions of homes and businesses. It's no longer a containment. That's released directly into the environment from 1,000 sources every day. It's insane that this is happening and has happened for 80 years. It's insane that the world is unaware of how this works, and it's the reason that they tell these lies is because the population is not aware of how radiation works and how it's emitted, and that the fuel pools are splitting atoms constantly into the environment. And because now, like we've seen all over the place, the bacteria, the fungus has gone in the soil. So the soil doesn't soak up water, so it soaks up heat. The ground soaks up heat. And so now that dries out whatever water is remaining. And now we're 14 years down the road. We're in real trouble. Because this is not going to change, clearly, right? We are looking at... Life as we know it has changed forever, post-Fukushima. And it's only going to get worse, unfortunately. And the cover-up is desperate to convince you that it's everything but the nuclear industry. And they're really good at it. You know, if you come across me, then you have a different narrative that makes you question their narrative all of a sudden. And unfortunately, that's the best we can hope for right now. We're not reaching a wide population for some reason, and we'd assume that's severe censorship. There's another word I wanted to use there. Well, it's not an accident, let's put it that way. Tropical bird populations have plummeted. Without dealing with the climate change, it won't be enough for birds. You can't deal with climate change. Climate change is 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry. And so gas, oil, and coal emits carbon. So carbon, you have more birds, more puppies, more bees, more trees, more flowers, etc., etc. Carbon's good, right? With radiation, it's the only emissions that make a plume that covers the whole planet symmetrically and attacks everything with replicating cells for millions of years. It never goes away, and we never stop producing it. And we also have 1,000+ fuel pools splitting atoms into the environment. And so we can't we can't fix. And then the industry is a blatant misrepresentation of facts. So this was a doctor who does transplant, who was doing lectures for Fukushima's homeless that were working at the Daiichi site, nuclear meltdown site. He compared working at a nuclear meltdown, multiple nuclear meltdowns, and around 36 reactor cores in 8 fuel pools missing, which is distributed worldwide in fine particulate and radioactive fallout. He compared it to smoking 14 cigarettes, not a day, but in a lifetime. Is the same as working at a nuclear meltdown. So, or kayaking for 15 minutes, for instance. These are completely disproportionate to the reality. And he's in charge of irradiating your loved ones and then trying to stick a pig's heart into them or something like that. He's never succeeded in his 40-year career, but everybody that was in front of him never survived, right? And had a horrible last year or two of their lives because they were destroyed by the radiation. And he's, there's so many of these people, you can't keep up with it. The overview study does not provide figures for individual species, but earlier literature is rich with examples of the devastating impact of rising temperatures. With acceleration is post-Fukushima. The supercell storms, the supercell typhoons, the supercell hurricanes are post-Fukushima events. And almost every hurricane, every typhoon, every cyclone is a supercell. When before, when the nuclear industry started, that's when we started seeing this massive amount of supercell storms. So there has to be a relationship there somewhere. And because of how radiation works, it's easy, if you're an honest person, right, and you included the actual emissions into the equation, it's easy now to make a direct link to the nuclear industry. One documented, he related decline of birds in Panama, including the king, can't even pronounce that for some reason, the red-crested, the two-colored kingfishers, the aurora, trogon. And when it gets into different languages, I generally don't even try. Another study published in 2017 showed how some tropical hummingbirds are now forced to seek shade to regulate their temperatures in extreme heat. So these are all extraordinary things. To reach the conclusion, he analyzed the observational data from more than 3,000 bird populations around the world and used statistical modeling to isolate the effects of extreme weather and other factors. Again, he refused to put into the equation 80 years of emissions from the nuclear industry to dumping, the nuclear meltdowns, to everything else. The finding helped complete the picture of a tropical bird decline and causes, well, look, if we have a coal plant breakdown or a gas plant or an oil plant breakdown, nobody blinks an eye. It doesn't matter. It's harmless, right? And that the emissions from the industry, coal is carbon is very heavy, it doesn't travel very far from the source. Radiation, though, will cover the entire planet in short order, and you can't avoid it. And there's nothing on the planet with an autoimmune trigger to defend against it. So not even bacteria, everything with replicating cells has an autoimmune trigger that attacks it. It doesn't try to fix and repair it. If it's an animal, it'll build a tumor around it. In the body's sense, the body's building a sarcophagus around a foreign object, which is anthropogenic man-made radiation fallout. But in reality, the body is using all of its resources. So to do it with white blood cells, because radiation in your body is pulsing energy at the speed of light every second, carbon doesn't do that. Not only that, you're getting full body x-rays from just being within hundreds of feet of the emissions, but the whole planet was an invisible snowstorm. And it's backed up by many different studies. High concentrations of plutonium and americium. High concentrations. This is forever. And this was Helen Kellicott and Arnie Gunnarsson, who refused to acknowledge the fuel pools are gone at Fukushima. right? And so they tell you some useful information, but then they stab you in the back and tell you the fuel pools were removed from. And I'll play a couple of clips for you, because I don't want to denigrate somebody, these academics, as just like a smear. I provide the documentation, and I'll do that right now for you. And it's really something, and they've been given every opportunity, right, they got, like Helen Caldicott had, done hundreds of interviews. In this video, she was asked, does the reactor look like this, or does it look like that? And you can guess, unfortunately, what she said.
Let me ask you this. You've said that if the spent fuel pool in number 4 collapses, that you would evacuate your family from Boston. Do you think we would ever know the truth of what's going on there? And the reason I ask is because we've seen coverage in the national news media here in the United States from ABC News and others that take video cameras in, saying that they're being given exclusive access to number 4 in the removal of the fuel rods, which is said to have begun. And what we see in the video being shared here in America is a pristine interior building. It doesn't look like a building in which the top blew off in a hydrogen explosion.
The Japanese are very tidy people, and they have, by robot control and by human beings, removed the debris from the top of Building 4, and it does look pristine.
But science doesn't work that way. You can't go on top of a building, build a new building, and say that it's fixed. These are nuclear meltdowns, right? It's a very dishonest answer. There was not by robots is a human, by the way. Humans can't work in that environment. And Arnie Gunnarsson was another one, and I'm going to play that coming up. So Arnie, now he built the assemblies the fuel racks for the fuel assemblies, which is the reactor cores, for the fuel pools, for 70 identical fuel pools as Fukushima in the United States. And so he refuses to acknowledge, in fact, he was in most of the stories of the videos where they claimed they were in the fuel pool. He was quoted in the stories.
Now, the division I ran built nuclear fuel racks for boiling water reactors exactly like Fukushima. And Unit 4
Exactly like Fukushima.
has always been my biggest concern. If you watched our website, on the very first week of the accident, I was saying that if Unit 4 were to catch fire, you'd have to evacuate Tokyo.
Well, am I wrong in saying the building to the right, Unit 4, caught fire? How many people, like if you think reactor 4 alongside of him to the right, if you think that caught fire, give me a thumbs up. If you think, now he made the racks that go at the top of the buildings. These buildings are supposed to be 190 feet tall. As you can see, all the guts are hanging out of the bottom of it, of the stump of this 190 foot, 65 meter, 150 foot wide building. And he said he should evacuate Tokyo if that happened. Well, that happened. Arnie says it didn't, see? And apply those findings to conservation initiatives. Again, if you're not going to acknowledge what happened at Japan and that it has an adverse effects upon the species, then you're digging our graves and all the other species. You're the opposite of a person. Would you eat this bug to save the world? Insects can play a key role in the future of human diets. In some countries, it's completely normal. Not the whole country, but certain sections of countries have become acclimated to eating insects. Insects could play a key role in the future of human diet with their high nutritional value, low environmental footprint, especially compared to meat. Now, there's an agenda because the meat is going to disappear from the radioactive fallout. And they're just setting that stage in increments. These people think 50, 100 years, 200 years down the road. The rows of plastic bags containing crickets, cockchaffers, nice one, grasshoppers, worms, larvae, some beetles, they crawl up the side of their cellophane prisons and trying to escape. And he tried to suppress the shutter. His job is to promote insects as food. The northeastern region of Isan in Thailand is as far east as you can go before the Mekong River and the border with Laos. People here consume bugs the way America eats potato chips. That's not always true though, right? They do eat some. It's just certain villages and certain communities. It's not the entire population. Ugh. I know because I looked into it heavily. And we've been at this a very long time. And I'm very honest. That's a terrible flaw in my personal life, by the way. There are served at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and often carried around a midday snack, which is true for some communities, some tribes. And in desperate times, everything looks good to eat, right? The main feature of the season was ant eggs. In both the markets, we visited Nong, I think that's Vietnam, is it? Hundreds of the pearly white nuggets were fanned out on banana leaves or plates and sold for $3 per plate. Yeah, BAHT, that's a Philippine terminology, I do believe, for money. It's not just foreigners who balk at, don't quote me though, because I'm not exactly sure. Thailand, even elsewhere in Thailand, people don't have the same penchant for creepy crawlies as you do here in the north. Much of the rest of Thailand, in fact, raised a skeptical eyebrow. So the first number of paragraphs, he was trying to convince you it was normal for the whole population, but in reality it's just small sections. Which is typical of these dishonest, disingenuous creatures that we call journalists for some reason. But it may turn out to be that they're onto something in this little community. Production of meat, a primary source of protein for many, is responsible for generating 60% of the carbon emissions related to food production. Right, so what they done, they came up with an agenda to blame carbon instead of radiation fallout on the woes of the species. And then they created what's known as the climate scientists genres. James Hansen, right, was one of the people that first brought it in front of a parliament or a Senate hearing. He had 15 minutes there, and he was considered the catalyst behind the carbon credits you're seeing now and climate change narrative you're seeing. But it's based upon a flawed, incredibly flawed science. And so then, by suggesting that carbon is the reason, carbon doesn't pulse energy at speed of light every second for millions of years. It doesn't live for millions of years. It creates more birds, more insects, more biota, more fungus, more beautiful bacteria, more plants and trees, more flowers and bees and everything else, right? Radiation kills it. It kills everything. It attacks everything with replicating cells. So which is the more likely issue? Something that is not recycled back into the ecosystem immediately, which is what carbon is. And carbon doesn't travel far from its source. And anthropogenic man-made radioactive fallout attack, like if you got a Cesium-137 single atom out in your garden, it's going to pulse through your house and through you and everybody else in your home, and it's going to wreck your chromosomes, your DNA, your cells. Your body's got to repair that every second. It can't keep up with that. Imagine what happens when it's in your body. Carbon doesn't have those attributes. Carbon doesn't go up, as their versions sometimes change. They claim it goes up into the atmosphere and it causes the sun. The sun is sending all this heat there and it can't reflect back out into the environment. You don't suppose that's all the planes up there spraying trails for the last 60 years. And the idea of that, I think, is to melt the glaciers so they get access to the resources, the minerals, etc., the precious metals that they need for their weapons and their ships and everything else, and their planes of destruction. They're stupid. I mean, we take all of our precious metals, for instance, we put it in the weapons. We put it in the satellites and blast it up into space where we can never use it again. It's an idiot industry, but it has a life of its own, right? And a lot of these industries are on the stock market, so you might never get rid of them. And the reason is because they have some human rights, which are illegal, which piggybacked in on the slavery laws. And Justice Hugo Black, Supreme Court Justice in the 30s, had wrote an eloquent dissent about how absurd it was to give corporations human rights, and then they can use those rights to attack a sovereign people, which is the people of the planet. We're sovereign people. The companies were all we were supposed to tax. That way, the government didn't get too big, right? Instead, they'd tax you, and not tax the companies. The companies put in their money offshore accounts. They don't pay state, federal, local taxes because of corporate personhood, which is an illegal amendment to the Constitution, and then was carried over into the Bill of Rights and the Magna Cartas and everywhere else. I like carbon. Carbon's great. Carbon cycle, essential for life on Earth. Radiation, the death of every species on the planet. Two different things, right? One, carbon's great. With the UN calling for an overhaul of the food system, why are you invoking UN? They're not regulatory agencies. They don't have any authority over any country. They're a corporation. They're structured, and they have the same signatures as McDonald's or Wendy's or Tim Hortons or whatever. They're just a big corporation with a whole bunch of subsidy, but it's 195 militaries, right? That's what UN is. Rising carbon dioxide levels disrupt insects' ability to choose optimal egg-laying sites. You sure it's not radioactive fallout? As atmospheric CO2 levels rise, the natural signal becomes confused. We know from history, right, that radiation destroys the insect's ability to reproduce, not carbon. That's CO2. Like when you had more CO2 on the planet during the dinosaur eras, the insects were massive. The animals were massive. They're bigger than whales. Fukushima Plume model showed 1 million atoms over the west coast per square meter. CO2 is not going to disrupt the species. It's not going to sterilize the species. Radiation, and these numbers, we've never even heard tell of before. 20 million particles of iodine-131, 220 million atoms. It doesn't travel by itself, see? Top International Atomic Energy Agency official, former, says Fukushima is a catastrophe for every citizen of the world. If it's a catastrophe for every person on the planet, it's a catastrophe for every bird, and mammal, and animal, and insect too. Radiation doesn't just affect humans. And radiation doesn't recognize borders. Dose from Fukushima fallout in Europe many times higher than California, government claim for the West Coast. And we've covered this extensively. As atmospheric CO2 levels rise, the natural signal becomes confused. As radioactive fallout levels rise, the natural signal becomes confused, is more like it. Trying to blame CO2 and trying to blame carbon for what's clearly 80 years of emission from the nuclear industry is the oldest song in the book, the oldest public relation song and dance. Look over here, don't look over there. Climate change is killing fireflies. So right now they don't tell you what climate change is, they just blame everything on the two words, climate change. It's a very dishonest thing to do. And the people that are doing it know it's a dishonest thing, right? It's a garbage can diagnosis. The climate change is real, but it's caused by 80 years of emission from the nuclear industry. And every year there's more radiation released into the environment because there's more fuel put into the fuel pools that are splitting atoms directly into the environment. Like, the reason every gas, oil, and coal plant is not surrounded by farms is because they need those areas for nuclear plants to keep the numbers down. The nuclear industry is surrounded by farms, as far as you can see, to keep the low doses around the site and to poison you in your supermarkets and your homes far, far away. And you're being targeted. This industry is 100% out to get us, and they've succeeded beyond their wildest. They're very dedicated too. It's a very strange industry because I can't blame people for not wanting to accept the truth, because that's quite frightening. See, very high concentrations of hot particles in the Pacific Northwest, including plutonium and americium. And this was Ernie Gunnison and Helen Collicott, but they didn't discover it. This was discovered by other people. They were just covering the story. And giving them credit when credit wasn't due was a serious mistake. And the idea was to promote them as the arbiter of facts when they were the public relation firms themselves. And that's just heartbreaking, because a lot of people, they speak very well, they got incredible educations, they got a lot of money, they're put up in the media all the time. That means they're not your friend, period. Radiation levels in the United States West Coast spiked to 1 million times normal after Fukushima explosion. The IRS, and it was 1 million to 10 million times of Cesium-137 per cubic meter of air what it was pre-Fukushima. This is an event. We've had an event, and it's never going to end. And because we won't acknowledge it, and we can't deal with it, because the industry has 80-year jump on us. Right, they're very entrenched in your governments, in your universities, in your medias. But the truth will set us free. Like, I am not kidding you when I say if a foundation was to put some faith into me, big foundation with hundreds of millions of dollars, and they put a couple of $1 million into someone like me, who's very organized, who's very ready to go, who's able to do the job, I can take the industry down to 6 months to a year. I'd take it apart. If I had public access. The public is not stupid. And the public will eat up all the material we produced, and I can guarantee you this industry would cease to exist very quickly. So, by putting the name climate change is killing the firefly, they can't quantify those assertions. Radioactive fallout is killing the fireflies. We can quantify those assertions. Radioactive fallout has broken the food chain now and has devastated all the species and the humans. We can quantify those assertions with the documentation of the actual numbers, and we know we have. And let me explain that to you for a second. Again, why do I always make this? First off, they know what radiation does. I'm going to prove that to you here in a moment. I'm just going to show you a fraction of proof. But what I want you to take away from the stuff I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you just a whole bunch of studies fairly quickly. So think about each one of these studies is about ionizing radiation and damage. And I want you to take into consideration there's millions and millions and millions of these types of studies documenting damage to everything, every biota, every cell, every species, its larvae, their eggs, their food, everything, their habitat. All of it is documented. Every tree, every plant, everything has been documented. And so they know everything about ionizing radiation, and they know that there's nothing on the planet with an autoimmune trigger that can defend against it. Ionizing radiation, harmful effects, basically every one of these studies, and there's a lot of people on these studies that are producing these studies, they're making a fortune, right? These are $100,000, $200,000, $500,000, $1 million studies. And they studied every facet of the ecosystem, every facet of the marine system, every facet of every egg and larvae of every species and humans. I mean, look at these studies. Look at all the people right there in that study over there. There's an incredible amount of documentation. They know that there is no redeeming qualities to anthropogenic man radiation. They know it affects and attacks and destroys everything with replicating cells. This is not a conjecture or an opinion at all. I can back this up with and I might just do that next week. I might just do nothing but studies for the entire next week and the week after. Every show, we'll cover some stories, but then we'll overwhelm my detractors with studies showing that they do know and that there is harms and that is well documented and everybody in the industry is well aware of it, and that excluding it from the equation is beyond dishonest. It's a conspiracy. And it's not tenable and it's not acceptable. Right? I could back that up with so much documentation. It blows my mind because I've been at it for so long. It still blows my mind how easy it is to prove that they know everything I'm saying is true. They know it better than I do, and I ever could and ever would. Even though I'm pretty tuned in, I'm pretty switched on. I've been at this a very long time, And I'm very aware, and I have an incredible archive of documentation that I've shared, absurd amount of documentation on a regular basis every week. If you watch my show for a week, you have more accurate information than anybody watching the media for their entire lifetime. And say they're 70 years old. I gave you more than 1 week or 2 weeks than anybody could dream of ever getting out of the media. If you took a apartment building at 100 people and they watched the media for 40 years, their combined education has nothing to what you learned tonight. That is terrifying. So there's nothing they don't know about radiation fallout, radiation contamination, radiation poison, radiation consumption. There's nothing they don't know. They've studied it all, and they studied it not just in North America, but every other country worldwide. And the majority of the studies produced worldwide are produced on anthropogenic man-made radiation. That should terrify you, and it should help you appreciate how much influence they have. And yet they say very little is known about the effects of anthropogenic man-made radiation. And that's completely dishonest. It's disingenuous. It's a blatant lie. It's a very harmful thing, right, to portray that they don't when they certainly do. And the evidence I show you hopefully helps you comprehend what I'm telling you. I got a tendency to show a lot of documentation for my assertions because it's an educational program. And if I was funded by a big organization, I can hire 10 people and put them to work, get them, some of them out doing research. You'd be shocked what I can do in 1 or 2 years and the difference we can make on this planet in a lousy 1 or 2 years. And my heart is broken that we might never get this opportunity. And so I just run an educational program and try to create as many educated people like myself as I can. And I think ultimately we win the battle that way. But because the policymakers and the investors will find me for the industry, and that will switch them off, we win again, right? My daily survey suggests British earwigs are declining drastically. I love earwigs. They're the cutest thing I've ever seen. Anything is cuter than a pro-nuclear anyway. My daily survey suggests British earwigs are declining drastically. What about my surveys? The species are annihilated by the radioactive fallout. That doesn't count. I found 282 earwigs, he says, in a single night, or she, I'm not sure, in 1996. In 2024, only 31 adults were trapped in that entire year. They would find almost 300 in a night. Now, you're lucky you find 30 in the entire year. Nuclear zombie scum, the parasites that hijack humans' minds. Too good to be true, right? I might have manipulated a few words there. Not saying I do. I could have. I might have. Dan, it looks pretty like you manipulated the words at the top of that page. I'm not saying I did. I'm not saying I didn't. I'm not saying it wouldn't be justified doing that. So let me delete everything we covered so far tonight, because I cover so much stuff. If I don't delete it next week, if I pick it up again, I'm liable to start all over and do the same stuff I already covered. And we've covered so much tonight. It's just holy shit. It's madness. And Donnie looks like I put a dent in it. I'm pretty burnt out here tonight, and I apologize that I'm not young anymore. I'm not able to do the things I used to do. I still got a pretty good push left in me though. Albino sperm whale filmed off the coast of Jamaica. Like last week and the week before, we've covered, I showed you earlier some of that material, where the videos are. We've covered absurd amount of emaciated sperm whales. an absurd amount. But like some stories, when you see an albino whale, that's pretty impressive. 40% of the North Atlantic right whale populations are used in the Gulf of St. Lawrence as a seasonal habitat. I was just thinking to myself, first off, they don't belong in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. They're usually up along Halifax, Nova Scotia. This is the interior of Canada, the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Peer-reviewed publication, which means another institution replicated the study. They got tons of money to demonize us. We don't have any sustainable or significant amount to go after them. Because I would litigate so many of these people in a heartbeat and win, which would be a deterrent for the other scumbags, excuse the language, for the other researchers, unresearchers, have identified 187 individual North Atlantic right whales, about 40% of the catalogued population in the Gulf, Canada's Gulf of St. Lawrence during the summer. Now we know this down here we're onto roughly. They used photographs of the North Atlantic right whale collected during surveys conducted between 2015 and 2019. Well, this is post-Fukushima we're talking about all of a sudden now. Researchers have identified 187 individual North Atlantic right whales, but 40%, we already covered that, Dana. Get with the program. I'm sorry. Almost all of these whales return every year, a pattern not seen elsewhere, and stay out for up to 5 months. In order to design effective protection measures against the endangered species, you got to kill all the radiation, get rid of it all on the planet. And we're not even trying, 80 years we haven't come up with a solution for anything. So everything is still splitting atoms directly into the environment. We're in real trouble. Major shipping corridors connect commercial vessels traffic from the Atlantic Ocean to the St. Lawrence and the Great Lakes. My dad's youngest brother was the relief skipper on the Evans Fitzgerald when she sank. It was his trip off. It was his friends. And then he was the youngest commissioned officer, first officer, into the Canadian Navy on the Quest 172 out of Halifax. And so they dragged sophisticated sonar vessels through the Bermuda Triangle for 30-something years. And they were looking for nuclear subs and nuclear missile sites on the ocean floor from, the so-called enemy. But I mean, the pictures, I've been on that ship, by the way. But the pictures you get from them out there doing that, where the only thing sticking out of the ocean were all these pipes and that. It was pretty impressive stuff. A combination of United States-Canadian efforts have monitored whales through visual surveys and acoustic listening devices in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, which is not where they would normally hang out to, right? They went there looking for the phytoplankton, the zooplankton. There were unprecedented numbers of dead right whales found in the Gulf of St. Lawrence in 2017, 2019. But that was because they had changed their habitat. Between 1980 and 2010, right up to Fukushima, the right whales spent the spring in Cape Cod Bay and waters off Cape Cod. During the summer, they moved north into the northern Gulf of Maine, the Bay of Fundy. I dove the Bay of Fundy. It's like diving a raging river. 50-foot tide exchange in 5.5 hours. It was crazy, man. It was the craziest thing I've ever experienced. Like, the boat would follow you, and so it would follow your bubbles, but it knew you were probably 700-800 feet ahead because you took your bubbles, a long time to get to the surface because the tide is so fast. It was insane. At the Bay of Fundy, Roseway Basin, where they found their preferred prey, copepods and zooplankton, starting in 2010/2011, this pattern began to change. Why would it change in 2010? There was no reason for that. The next year was Fukushima. So instead of saying 2011, because people would go, oh, Fukushima, they were a little dishonest to put 2010 there. This pattern began to change with many whales heading to the Gulf of St. Lawrence in late spring and using new habitats to the south of Massachusetts year-round. So in 2011, it actually is when it changed, not 2010. There needed to be an event, a catalyst for them to change in 2010. There was not. It was the next year, 2011. In the last decade, North Atlantic right whale distributions, habitat occurrence patterns. Now, we've covered this different versions of this story over the last decade, by the way. So I was already aware of all of this. But it was interesting to see this story show up last month. What was the date on this? Hang on here, I'll check. No, right here. The date should have been right there, I thought. That's a recent story. I might find it at the end of this. It was right at the same time as that other story. So it was last month, or in the last number of weeks somewhere. In the last decade, North Atlantic right whales distribution, habitat, occupancy patterns have become less predictable. They're spending less time in places where they typically aggregated in the past. Well, because they've been doing that for millions of generations, right? It's built into them. But if they can't find the food, they got to keep going because they need food. And so, right, they ended up here in the St. Lawrence. And this is a new phenomenon post-Fukushima. We have started to observe them in places where we had not found them aggregating before, which is not normal because they're genetically driven to a migratory pattern. It's built into them. If you raised a whale in a swimming pool, big swimming pool, for 20 years, and you put it in the ocean, it'll try to do its genetic migratory pattern, because it's been doing it for millions of generations, right? It's hardwired into them. So desperation, they showed up. Now they have memories, so they found food in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, so they came back. But they still got a tendency to follow their patterns. But they also know they found food in this weird place. And because these particular smells and oceans wash right up to Halifax, right, it was an easy transition for them. That was a fluke of nature. Surveys have confirmed right whales in large numbers in the Gulf of St. Lawrence during the summer. They found an increase in the number of right whales using Cape Cod Bay in the late winter and spring, which was not the normal routine. Vessel strikes, entanglement in the fishing gear are the leading cause of mortality and serious injuries for right whales. But it wasn't, was it? It was starvation like all the other species. And the primary cause of an unusual mortality events. Now, the unusual mortality event is not all the whales getting tangled up in gear. You had 14,000 gray whales showing up emaciated. That's not fishing gear does that. It's right, they starvation. You've seen the same attributes for 10,000 humpback whales. You've seen the same thing now with 10,000 beak whales. You see the same thing with all the species. We're seeing mass strandings of every species. We've never seen that. They're using habitats that could lack protection measures. Well, because they never aggregated here before, pre-Fukushima. Fewer than 100 adult females. You can't save the whales because we broke the food chain. And so they're just going to leverage it and weaponize it against you and blame you. But it's not your fault. Don't let them get away with that. Don't accept that narrative. They broke the food chain. They were going to break it anyway. We didn't need nuclear meltdowns. We didn't need Fukushimas or Chernobyls or anywhere else. The fuel pools will ultimately end our planet because of the emissions are not contained in their perpetual. Carcass of a sperm whale washed ashore in Kauai, which I think is Hawaii. Owners should keep dogs and pets away from the material, the whale, so they don't eat it and get sick. Why would they get sick? Normally, other species will feed on it, but not. So why would a dog? If predators will feed on a dead whale and don't die, why would a dog? Is all I'm saying, right? Does that sound crazy? Black bear injured a Baker County man. So I've been paying attention to bear attacks. And one thing, we're seeing a lot of skinny bears. Right? There's that thing going on. Alaska's absent snowy owls. This is 2021. The only reliable snowy owl breeding site in the United States is a conspicuous shortage of owls. They're amazing looking creatures, though, eh? And they migrate. Alaska is witnessing a troubling decline. If one of only 3 active nests Holt has found this week crisscrossing a peninsula squeeze between the Beaufort Sea, the Chukchi, I don't know the names. Alaska, the only one where chicks hatch. Before the summer's out, you'll find just one more nest, and it failed too. This is a story we've been seeing of different species. That the seed eaters are the only one we've seen that are surviving. All species that are like insect eating or reptile eaters or whatever the case may be are decimated because the food chain is broken. But seed still exists, eh? Some owls are known to overwinter here where they spend the majority of their lives, but most relocate for the coldest months of the year to southeastern Canada, United States as far south as Texas, Florida, and Russia. And what he's seen in the past few years troubled him is nets. The nests are declining. The babies are not, the fledglings are not making it to adulthood or to, teenager land. In 2020, he found none. Why did the snowy owl start disappearing from the burrows? Well, all of these stories have one thing in common. They're post-Fukushima. It's too quiet out here, eerily quiet this year. And so it's not, the quiet is just all the other species that the owls are generally going to eat, right? This year, the breeding site, the only place in the United States where snowy owls regularly breed. The lemmings, which they catches with snap traps, are also notably absent. The snowy owls take advantage of the coastal environments, supplementing their diets with ducks and shorebirds and gulls and jiggers, and eat owl eggs, and a relative of the gulls may eat owl eggs in returns. If the breeding site collapses, maybe yet another symptom of, and then they got to put out a garbage can diagnosis of climate change. And they can't get funding unless they blame it on climate change, is what I'm hearing. All he can do now is watch for patterns and try to make sense of them, hoping they'll eventually lead him towards answers. So refusing to put Fukushima radioactive fallout into the equation, and the fact that that has the ability to destroy the food that the birds are dependent upon, is not an accident, unfortunately. There are indicators that the bird global population is in decline. This is global. The International Union for Conservation of Nature red list of threatened species marked the snowy owl's status as vulnerable for the first time post-Fukushima in 2017. Snowy owl population appeared dropping rapidly in North America and likely in Northern Europe and Russia. Well, that's a pretty bold statement. Clearly it's going to be backed up by facts that they know is already true, see? Right? They can't just make a conjecture like that without a reason, so they know what's going on. In 2018, researchers determined the surface air temperatures in the Arctic were warming twice as fast as the rest of the world. Well, that's because the glaciers were melting and were almost gone, right? And we documented the melting of the glaciers from Alaska down to the Rocky Mountains all the way down to Vancouver. And so by the time I pulled out of there was no glaciers left, which in perfect condition will take 5,000 years to replenish. So what would have been the catalyst? The only thing we know was Fukushima. Radioactive fallout means the ice can't crystallize anymore. And because the planet now is heating up, the water gets underneath it is much warmer, it melts much faster. And that cold water normally regulated your estuaries, your rivers, your streams, and everything else during droughts. And so it regulated temperature in those rivers and everything. It also raised the level of the rivers so that the steelhead and the salmon could still migrate up during droughts, right? Once you got rid of the glaciers, you lost that attribute, and that whole ecosystem, that whole biodiversity had collapsed because the rivers were too hot to sustain life. We're seeing the same thing, right now in France. Was their biggest rivers, which they're dependent upon for most of the nuclear plants to cool, and for their farms. 70% of the water, by the way, goes to the nuclear industry in France. We've seen that whole ecosystem collapse. The rivers, the nuclear plants have to stop running in the summertime because the rivers are boiling hot. And we're seeing that in many other places. I've actually have quite a few folders of that stuff in particular that I've been tracking for post-Fukushima. I should just do a presentation on just the missing glaciers. In 2018, research determined that, and one of the things we noticed with the glacier melting is you have these pulse events from radiation weapons testing that was sequestered in the ice shields, right? And they're gone. In 2018, research, and not only that, that cold water would regulate the coastlines too. We don't have that no more. And so that was a catastrophic event because the coastlines is a pretty big nursery for the oceans, right? The tidal zones. In 2018, research determined the surface air temperatures in the Arctic are warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. I got to do a presentation on the Arctic. Now, we know they dumped, the Russians, the Soviets, had 18,000 nuclear dumps in the Arctic alone, which is really unconscionable that they done that, right? Including submarines with multiple reactors and freighters full of reactor cores. The Al Research Institute was awarded a grant in 2017 to determine whether climate change is causing the nest decline, climate change. So you can get, if you're doing a study on climate change, even if you're brand new, you can get funding. And you'll get prominence too. Even if your story is completely garbage, as long as you blame climate change, the invisible garbage can diagnosis we see in news for everything, but without no science to back it up. Well, the science behind climate change is Fukushima, or the nuclear industry and events like Fukushima and ocean dumping. Hello, everybody. How are we doing? Wow. I think we made it. And it is what it is, right? We don't have enough to cover, enough time to cover everything I got in my aggregated, just in my session right here. And so I'm going to delete. These whales are so decimated that a single birth was cheered by scientists. So the next time we cover that will be next week sometime. We'll pick up on that story. I thought we've done pretty good tonight. I'm not going to extend it because I still got a bunch of work I got to do tomorrow to finish off a project that I've been working on for a long time, and I finally got somewhere with it. And it's going to be very useful. We might not get to use it this year as much as I was hoping, but all next year we'll be able to utilize it. There's a severe emaciated sperm whale that time. The radioactive fault is real. It's so real. And it's the only, there's nothing on the planet with an autoimmune trigger that can defend against it. I'm kind of stuffed up here right now. Considering all remaining gray whales are emaciated and dying, will they go extinct within 2 years? Somebody said no. A couple of people said no. But why would you say no? They're all emaciated. Last year on the migratory route, they're emaciated this year. They're clearly going to disappear. I don't think they'll make it. I don't think they're going to make it back to Baja, Mexico, right? New Mexico. I don't think they're going to make it back. They were so emaciated last year, as you can see their rib cages sticking out, their shoulder blades sticking out, their peanut heads, their spinal column sticking out. We've covered this for so long. I'm not saying this, I'm not putting that out there for something to do. I'm putting it out there because here's my prediction for the next year. This is my prediction. And you can hold me to it. It's going to get bad. In the next year or two, I don't think many people will be in denial that something happened in 2011. And then, so the only thing is, anybody asks themselves, what really happened in 2000? There's a lot of things happened in 2011. Let me touch on that for 1 second. There was a lot of distractions in 2011. Let me cover that for 1 minute, which was really helpful to the nuclear industry. So you had Japan, tsunamis. Tsunami was up to 140 feet high in some places. It came in at 400 miles per hour. Al-Qaeda leader, Osama bin Laden, was killed. That took up the news for like 2 months straight. Mubarak, the Egyptian, was overthrown, which we know was a useful idiot for UN. He was brutalized, and that took up the media heavily. The Arab Springs, Tanzania, what they done to Gaddafi was holy smokes. Gaddafi was a well-known, for many decades, he was known as a player for the military-industrial complex, United Nations. But then he decided he was going to get off the United States standards. And what they done to him, and they done it on YouTube, live stream, the murder of Gaddafi on YouTube. It was probably one of the most ugly and violent murders in history. I'm not going to say what they done, but it was unconscionable. It was on purpose, and that took up the media for a few months. Prince William got married, and you couldn't find anything on TV for 2 months because that would show up everywhere. Every commercial, they would bash you in the head with that stuff. The English riots hit their peak in London. That wasn't an accident. Steve Jobs died. I had made a video about it. I never got a single view on my video. And so that took over the media. It was all this, they put him on a pedestal, but they most likely got rid of him. The English riots began on the back because he was the genius, right? And he was in the way. He had control. He was the architect, right? He was controlling 10,000 computer engineers. So he was the architect. He was the orchestra leader. The English riots began on the back of peaceful protests over a police shooting of Mark Duggan in London, and then North Korea leader. So 2011, there was all of these distractions. You notice how none of these were the biggest stories of 2011. None of them are talking about the nuclear meltdowns, which is the actual biggest story of 2011. The other ones were crazy stories, and clearly some of them were orchestrated. Alrighty. Looks like we got options tonight. James has put out another song. I'm just going to go with his latest one. I was going to play the one he published earlier, which is really good. And it reminds me, like I said earlier, of like a disco. And like, I like certain genres of music. You like certain genres of music. Your kids like a certain genre of music. You're going to find all of these genres over at James Luce's website. I'll tell you that right now. And Tyler brought that up on the screen. So he just posted a new song, the cover and the pump. Is that the pump and dump, I wonder, or is that something else? This video is about Martin Frackler, New York Times, Tokyo Bureau, in Koriyama City, I do believe it was, had come out with a cover story about cancer rates in thyroids. It's a terrible story. Most likely to cover that on Sunday night. And the cover and the pump, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to stop the video. Now, he's most likely got a story linked below. It's not always the case, but just bear with me. Let me check. Yeah, he's got a link there. And I should do this before I play any songs that change the site. He doesn't do stuff for the sake of doing it. There's a motivation. There's something that he says, look, this story needs some prominence. Cat in San Francisco was killed after the latest bird flu infection tied to raw pet food. You know, another thing they use food for is animals from the nuclear wasteland. I'm not saying that the stories doesn't have some kernels of truth. I'm just saying, whenever you see the word bird flu or H1 or H5N1 viruses, you have to be pretty suspicious. That's the cover story as far as we can tell. And so I'm assuming the song he's got is based upon that story. And so keep that in mind as you listen to this. And by the way, shout out to Colette, threw out a donation at me tonight. Bless your heart, Colette. And please don't put yourself in a bad position. I'll be okay at the end of this month. Life will be back to normal for the most part. And I'm really looking forward to that, by the way. And we're not that far away. So, but I needed it, and I appreciate it, and I hope you'll be okay. And anybody can donate. You can find links in the bottom description to PayPal. It's really simple. And we'll see everybody hopefully on Sunday. Have a great night. Take care, everybody.
They call it a fever, say it comes on the breeze. Cats and cattle coughing, dropping to their knees. But the boats keep docking, no one speaks the cost. It ain't a passing season, it's a debt that can't be lost. The cover and the pump, that's the way it runs. Tell another story, shift it as it comes. The cover and the pump, watch the headlines play, hide the deeper trouble, trade it all away. Stern glass took the measure, they buried what he wrote. Children growing fragile, where the fallout hit their throats. They'll say it's just a virus, mask another round. But the elephant is pacing, and it shakes the common ground. The cover and the pump, spin it in the news, write it like an answer anyone can use. The cover and the pump, shuffle through the file, carry it convincing, hold it for a while. company, FDA made their claim. A cat got sick in Frisco, and Roar took the blame. But the questions keep on stacking, the story won't dispose. When the fallout writes the headline, well, everybody knows. Cover and the pump, markets on the rise. New scale makes a promise, while the project slowly dies. The cover and the pump, call it clean and new. Hide the cracks in concrete, sell it back to you. COVID comes around again, they say it's in the air. No one checks the shoreline, or the isotopes gathering there. Bird flu makes the papers, but the plume drifts through the sea. Sickness in the system, they don't want us to see. The cover and the pump, that's the way it runs. Tell another story, shift it as it comes. The cover and the pump, cover and the pump. Cover and the pump, cover and the pump.
That was really good, man. Thank you. Take care, folks.